Hi, I'm Kaylee, and these are all the books that I read in April. So first, let's get into some of my reading stats for April. I read 28 books in April. I read 3 classics, 1 children's book, 4 middle grade, 1 fantasy, 1 historical fiction mystery, 1 YA, which I DNF'd. I read 16 picture books, and I read 1 book that I can only describe as weird. So I read 1 book from the weird genre. I don't know how to classify it, so that's what we're gonna call it. Before we dive into all the lovely and weird books that I read, I'm gonna reach back here to the Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're gonna shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to A Reader's Almanac with Celeste. I will make sure to leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you've ever read a book that you can only describe as weird. And of course, follow me over on Instagram and Goodreads and Storygraph and all the places. So I know that you guys are asking yourselves, what is this weird book that she read which defies classification? So let's just talk about that one first. I read a book that kind of has 2 titles. The main title, I think, is just the letter S, and then the secondary title is Ship of Theseus. It's actually written by J.J. Abrams and Doug Dorst, but the Ship of Theseus has a fictional author, V.M. Straka or something. So this is a book within a book. This is like a fictional book inside of another fictional book. I don't know how to describe this. The fictional book shows handwritten fictional notes in the margins from Jen and Eric as they read the book text. And they speculate about the mystery surrounding the author, who's also a fictional character in their world. I can't explain this properly. The main text of Ship of Theseus is about a man who has amnesia, and he is shanghaied on board this really strange ship. While he's on board this ship, time seems to move differently than it does on land. And the sailors all have their mouths sewn shut. They are unable to speak. It's pretty gross. So the man discovers this vast plot spanning many years, and he becomes an agent trying to stop an evil warlord. So Jen and Eric are reading this book, and they believe that the author wrote the story as an allegory for real world events. And different characters represent certain world leaders or corrupt businessmen. And so the author wrote this fictional book, but representing real people trying to expose their evil deeds. So as Jen and Eric get closer to the dangerous truth, they also become closer to each other. There are also little notes and newspaper clippings and postcards and little letters and photographs, all tucked in between the pages where Eric and Jen have left them for the other person to find. And the book even includes a code breaker disc so that you can crack the hidden codes along with Jen and Eric. So all the other reviews that I read said, first you need to just read through the main text of Ship of Theseus and then go back and read all the little handwritten notes from Jen and Eric. So I stuck through the horrific main text, which I hated, because I had read other reviews that said once you get to the handwritten notes, it's such a sweet love story between Jen and Eric, and it's so lovely, and then you'll love it. So I got all the way through the main text and then went back and started reading the handwritten notes, and I just hated it even more. I got to about a page 101 of the handwritten notes, and I just DNF'd the book. I was like, this has just taken up enough of my life at this point. There was such a lot of cursing and profanity in the handwritten notes that I just couldn't stand it anymore. And I stuck through the main text hoping that the mystery would be resolved. Like the mystery of the ship, and why does time move differently on the ship, and why are the sailors' mouths sewn shut? I thought those things would eventually be explained, but they weren't. Nothing was explained. The main character's amnesia was never explained. There's just this open, ambiguous ending, and it was awful. The main text was violent and creepy. All the characters are super weird. Their behavior is really strange. The violence is really nasty, and the notes in the margins are random and out of order. However, the writing style itself is very powerful and deliberate. You can tell there's a lot of thought that went into it. Every little detail has meaning, usually on 2 or 3 different levels. There's like the main meaning of the basic story, and then there's a hidden meaning underneath that, where the writer was actually referencing something in their own fictional life. And then there's an emotional or spiritual meaning, as the character represents some allegorical concept. And then there's probably some obscure etymological reference to birds, because that was a whole thing, was birds. It was beautiful and exhausting, but beautiful in like the way that a tsunami is beautiful, and then it just leaves mud and destruction and death in its wake. So yeah. I gave it 1 star. I DNF'd it. I hated it so much. And I don't know how to categorize it. Is it a mystery? Is it a spy novel? I just don't know what this is. The only genre where I know to put it is weird. So a book that has been on my TBR for this year is to read the next book in the Percy Jackson series, The Chalice of the Gods. I love Percy Jackson. I have read most of Rick Riordan, but I'm still working my way through some of the newer series. I still haven't read Magnus Chase, and I still haven't read Trials of Apollo. So I'm just like, I'm trying to systematically work my way through some of these. And I thought, well, we have the new Percy Jackson, let's just go ahead and do that. And of course, I loved it because I love Rick Riordan and I love Percy Jackson. So it is Percy's last year of high school. He needs 3 recommendation letters from the gods if he wants to get into college. So of course, he teams up with Annabeth and Grover to do a few last-minute quests. Their first task is to find the stolen cup of Ganymede, Zeus's cupbearer. I just love this. It was everything that I love about Percy Jackson and more. I love Percy's sarcasm and sass. I love the whole group dynamic between Percy and Annabeth and Grover. It's like, yeah, the original team back together again. It was just fantastic. And I loved seeing more of Percy just hanging out at home with his mom, you know, eating blue food. And of course, I loved the adventurous plot and the humor. There was just something so delightfully charming and hilarious about Percy Jackson books that just keeps me coming back for more. It tugs at your heart and it makes you laugh at the same time, and I can't wait to read more new books in the Percy Jackson series. I gave this book 5 stars. I just love it. I also listened to the audiobook of The Red Pyramid. This is the first book in the Kane Chronicles by Rick Riordan. I can't believe that I've loved Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus all these years, and somehow I just never read the Kane Chronicles. But I finally read it. I listened to an audiobook, which I really enjoyed. This is about Carter and Sadie, who are brother and sister, but they rarely see each other since Sadie lives with her grandparents and Carter travels all around the world with his father, who is studying ancient artifacts. On one of their rare visits together, their dad takes them to the British Museum to see the Rosetta Stone. The kids discover that their dad has connections with ancient Egypt, and he wants to see the Rosetta Stone because he thinks that ancient Egyptian gods are trapped inside the stone and he wants to release them. But there is a secret society called the House of Life that is determined to incarcerate the gods again, and Carter and Sadie are caught in the middle. I really loved this fun adventure. I love stories with sibling relationships. Sadie is full of spunk and sass, and Carter is very serious and responsible. So they make a great team, and I love the sibling dynamic between them. At first, it's all kind of quips and friendly insults between them because they haven't spent a lot of time together. They don't really know each other that well. But as their adventure gets more dangerous, the siblings really open up to each other and begin to feel more like a family. And of course, I loved the adventurous plot and learning all about the legends of the ancient Egyptian gods. So I listened to the audiobook, and there were two different narrators for Carter and for Sadie that told the story from their different points of view. And they did a wonderful job. They really brought forward the comedy in the story. And so I enjoyed it a lot. I gave it 4 stars, and I've already bought the next book in the Kane Chronicles series on audiobook, because I love these narrators so much that I want to continue with audiobook again. I read Basil in the Wild West. This is the next book in the Basil of Baker Street series, The Great Mouse Detective. So Basil and his faithful friend Dawson are traveling from Mexico into the American West. They hear about a gang of smugglers who are stealing ancient artifacts from Mexico and smuggling them across the border disguised as ordinary souvenirs. And then they sell them on the black market. So of course, Basil and Dawson are on the case. I just love this series so much. I've always been a huge fan of the Great Mouse Detective movie. So of course I was delighted to discover that they're actually based on books. And not just one book, but a whole delightful series. I gave this 5 stars, absolutely adorable. Then I tried to read Jo and Laurie. So this is like an alternate reality of Little Women, where Jo March has just published her first novel, and the publishers are clamoring for more stories about Jo and her sisters. But they want Jo to write stories about she and her sisters meeting young men and getting married. Jo and Laurie have always been best friends, but writing her next book brings up some emotional questions about their relationship, and the nature of their relationship starts to change. This was like reading about an alternate reality inside a pocket universe in another dimension. There were just so many layers, so many alternate realities of this story that I was trying to keep track of. Because, you know, the original Little Women is already kind of an alternate fictional reality, because Louisa May Alcott based her characters on herself and her sisters. So there's like the real world Louisa May, and then there's the fictional Josephine March. And then this book has a fictional Jo and a book Jo. But the book that she wrote in this alternate reality is not the same as the original Little Women book. So it's like, it takes some mental calisthenics to keep track of 4 different versions of this story. It was just very weird. I've always loved the original Little Women, and I've reread it dozens of times. So I came into this already loving the characters. I tried to come into it with an open mind, like, oh, what a fun retelling or something, not expecting it to be exactly like the original or anything. But I just wanted to have a fun time reimagining a beloved story, and I was just really disappointed. The dialogue is boring. I mean, like, mind-numbingly boring. In one scene, Laurie literally says the exact same phrase 3 times. If he had said it twice, like, that would be fine. I would get it. Like, he repeated himself for emphasis or something. But 3 times was just too much. It was boring. It was like, you know, rephrase it or something. Whatever that you're trying to say, rephrase it in a new way. Don't just say the exact same thing 3 times. There was also some cursing in the dialogue that I felt was extremely out of place for these characters and this type of story. And the plot is super slow. In the first several chapters, nothing happens whatsoever. The first 100 pages could have been condensed down to like 30 pages. So I made it to page 79 and I just gave up. I DNF'd it. The main idea sounds like fun, but the writing just did not live up to my expectations. So I gave it 2 stars. Just, ugh. I also listened to the audiobook of Jane and the Waterloo Map. This is the 13th book in the Jane Austen mystery series by Stephanie Barron. In this book, Jane is invited to the palace of the Prince Regent to visit his library. She is delighted that the Prince Regent has granted her the honor of dedicating her newest book, Emma, to him. Of course, in real life, Jane secretly despised the Prince Regent. Of course, I say secretly. It was a pretty well-known fact that she hated him. She hated him for his selfishly lavish and promiscuous lifestyle. But while Jane is visiting the library, a military man stumbles in, foaming at the mouth, obviously poisoned, collapses to the floor, and when Jane tries to help him, he whispers 2 words right before he dies: Waterloo Map. So Jane begins to investigate what could the poor man have meant, and why would he have been poisoned right there in the Prince Regent's own palace. I really liked this story, and of course the history behind it. There's quite a lot of real history woven in with the mystery story, but we get to learn about Jane's real family and her acquaintances, things that she did and things that she really said and people she knew. But of course, the murder mystery and Jane's involvement in the investigation are purely fictional. In this book, I really loved learning more about the military campaigns surrounding the Battle of Waterloo. And of course, I loved seeing more of Jane's brother, Henry. He's always ready to dive in and assist Jane, whether it's problems with her publisher or whether it's a murder investigation. It is really interesting to imagine what their family dynamic might have been like and how they might have conversed with one another. And I especially like the scenes between Jane and her niece, Fanny. Jane is supposed to be acting as a chaperone for her niece, but she's not doing a very good job because they keep getting distracted by clues. I really enjoyed this one, and I loved Kate Redding as the narrator for the audiobook. I gave it 4 stars. I started picking up the Little House on the Prairie series as my bedtime book because I really just need something that I've already read before that I'm really familiar with, that's just very wholesome and calm and sweet, and something with short chapters that I can just be like, read a chapter and fall asleep. I found that if I try to read anything exciting at bedtime, I just end up staying up late. So I just needed something like a bedtime book, you know? So Little House has been perfect for that this past month. I've read Little House in the Big Woods and Little House on the Prairie, and I'm already in the middle of Farmer Boy. I always give every book in this series 5 stars. I've absolutely adored it ever since I was a kid. I've reread it. It feels like thousands of times, but it's a few dozen probably. Every time that I reread it, I am just charmed all over again with the tales of wilderness survival. In this entertainment age, it's so refreshing to be transported back to a time when life was simpler and slower. My favorite characters are, of course, Charles Ingalls Pa. He's boisterous and jolly, he's steady and strong and hearty, and of course I've always been drawn to him as a character because he's a musician, and I'm a musician as well. I was also fascinated by him when I was a child because his name is Charles, and my dad's name is Charles. So as a child, that was just a big deal to me, this recognition of a father figure and equating that with my father. It felt like my real life carried over into a book. And I've always felt a deep kinship with Laura. She's so feisty and determined. She's loud and energetic, and those are all qualities of my personality as well. I always give these 5 stars. It's been a few years since I've reread the Little House series, so I've really been enjoying it. Now, before I had Little House as my bedtime book, I was reading some short stories by Ellen Montgomery, which of course I've already read many times before. This compilation of short stories is Across the Miles, Tales of Correspondence. So some type of letter features in the story and somehow changes what's happening for the characters. I always love books by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Of course, I love Anne of Green Gables and all of those books, Emily of New Moon and all of those. And reading one of the short stories at bedtime or when I have insomnia or something has really helped me because it's only, 10 or 15 pages. And so you get a lovely, wholesome story, and it's time to fall asleep. I really enjoyed those as well, and I gave them 5 stars. I read through An Unexpected Apprentice. This is the first book in the Tildy Somerby duology. This has been described as The Hobbit if Bilbo was a girl. I don't know if I would quite describe it that way, but there are hobbit-like creatures that are not called hobbits, though. They are called small folk. So Tildy lives a simple life on the farm in the land of the small folk. But when her brothers are all killed by monsters, she is left alone on the farm, and the council decides a woman cannot handle the farm by herself, and they insist that she has to get married. So she runs away and travels out into the wide world of wizards and humans and centaurs and elves. Now, before her brother died, he had applied to become an apprentice to a wizard. So Tildy dresses up like a boy, pretends to be her brother, and takes that letter of apprenticeship and goes out into the wide human world, traveling to the city to find the wizard and become an apprentice. I really loved the first part of the book where Tildy is running away and then when she is studying with the wizard. But as soon as Tildy goes on a quest with a whole troop of other characters, the focus changes to be more on those other characters. And I kind of lost interest. I wanted more of Tildy and the wizard, but there are a lot of tangents and even whole chapters from other characters' point of view. And I ended up just kind of skimming through some of the other chapters that did not include Tildy. I really connected with her character and I just didn't really care about anybody else. The writing is really fun and whimsical, but there is a lot of violence right at the beginning when Tildy's brothers are killed. But I felt like there was a good balance between serious themes and some further violence, but also lighthearted scenes throughout the book. However, the book ends on a cliffhanger, so then I had to buy the second book in order to find out what happens. So I'm in the middle of reading the second book right now and enjoying it pretty well. There are still a lot of tangents with other characters, but the focus seems to be shifting a little bit back more towards Tildy now. So I gave the first book 4 stars, so we'll see how I like the second book. The rest of the books in this video are books that I received for free from a publisher in exchange for a free and honest review. So I read a collection of short stories called We Are Sea Turtles. This follows different children around the world who encounter sea turtles in some way, and each child is inspired by the turtles to live their life with courage and be true to themselves. I enjoyed the basic stories, but I got so annoyed with the constant preaching about the environment that I just DNF'd the book after page 103. I also felt like each story was too short to really give a full character arc. It felt sort of disappointing to get to know this lovely character and then their story just kind of fizzles out. The story structure just needed more time to develop. I ended up giving it 2 stars. This was just not for me. But then I read a wonderful book, Out of the Valley of Horses by Wendy Orr. This was like my diamond in the rough discovery for this month. I admit when I first picked it up, I was like, I'll skim through this and, see if it's any good. And then I was just completely immersed in this wonderful dream of a story. So Honey and her family went on a road trip and they discover a hidden valley where a herd of wild horses live. Once they cross the river to enter the valley, they can never find the bridge again. And they must live in the valley for the next 7 years. And it's the magic of the valley and the herd of horses that keeps them there. So Honey and her little brother Rumi grow up riding the wild horses and planting crops and fishing for food and just enjoying this idyllic life of peace. But when danger threatens their family, Honey must trust the horses to show them the way out of the valley when the time is right. This book is like a dream world of enchantment. The writing feels like a reverie in the way that it flows along. It just takes you on this journey into dreamland. And the magic of the valley is never explained. Normally that would bother me. I'm the kind of person that needs things to be explained. But the way that it's written, you just kind of have to accept that this is the way things are in the valley and this is the magic of the horses. I really loved the descriptions of how Honey's family survived for 7 years. They very cleverly use every resource available to them to plant crops and harvest fruit. They reuse every scrap of fabric and thread for their clothing. And I love the characters and their quirky ways. They've adapted to life in the valley and they have their own ways of talking and behaving. There are some really meaningful themes and special moments of introspection in this book. There's this one scene where Rumi is worried and excited and happy and scared all at once. He's trying to take in all these changes that are occurring in the valley and in his life. I just want to read you this one quote because it really spoke to me. Rumi breathed deep, pulling the beauty inside, all the sights, sounds, and sensations. The more he did it, the more it calmed his fear. He knew this peace wouldn't change what happened, but it made him feel stronger. There are some really beautiful lessons to be learned in this book, and it encouraged and inspired me. I finished this book in one day because it was so delightful, so refreshing, and I gave it 4 stars. I also read a lot of really lovely picture books, which I have shared with my nieces, and they have really loved them as well. The bookshelves that I have in my house that are just for picture books for my nieces are beginning to overflow because we just get so many lovely books from publishers and everything, and the girls just love it. Our favorite time is when we get to sit down and read together. And those are the books that I read in April. Please leave me a comment and let me know what were some weird or wild or dreamy or wonderful books that you read this past month. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.